This move opens a central diagonal for the queen and bishop, immediately staking a claim in the center and preparing to develop pieces towards the king. This move establishes a symmetrical pawn structure, immediately contesting the center and setting the stage for classic queen's pawn game development, where both sides aim to control central squares. This move develops a knight towards the center, controlling key squares and preparing for castling, setting up a solid foundation for classical central control and future queenside expansion. Developing the knight to f6 is a principled move, preparing for kingside castling while also contesting the center and potentially leading to openings like the queen's gambit declined or the Slav defense. This move, c4, initiates the queen's gambit, a fundamental opening where white immediately challenges black's central pawn and aims to gain a space advantage and control of the center. This move transitions into a queen's gambit declined structure, preparing to develop the bishop and solidifying the central pawn chain. This move, 4, bg5, pins black's knight to the queen, creating immediate pressure and preparing to disrupt black's pawn structure if black plays dxc4. This move prepares to recapture the bishop on g5 with the knight, reinforcing the center and developing a piece without creating pawn weaknesses. This move consolidates the pawn structure, prepares for the development of the king's bishop, and maintains flexibility for castling while accepting a slightly passive but solid position. This move prepares to reinforce the central pawn on d5 and potentially create a pawn chain with b7 c6 d5, a common structure in queen's gambit declined systems to control key central squares. This move prepares to develop the queenside knight to f3, supporting the central pawn and potentially allowing for further pawn advances like e4 or b4, while maintaining flexibility. This move develops the bishop to a natural square, preparing to castle and maintaining flexibility for future pawn breaks, while avoiding the immediate pin black might face on the f6 knight if they played dxc4. This move develops the bishop to a more active square, preparing for kingside castling and potentially supporting a central pawn push. This move challenges white's central pawn structure, aiming to gain space and potentially open lines for piece activity in the queen's gambit declined. Orthodox variation. This move recaptures the pawn and develops the knight, centralizing it and preparing to castle, while also challenging black's central pawn structure. This move initiates castling, a fundamental defensive maneuver that secures the king and activates a rook, preparing for central pawn control and potential pawn breaks. This castling maneuver secures the king and prepares to activate the rook on the h1a8 diagonal. This move challenges white's central pawn presence and aims to disrupt the pawn structure, potentially leading to an isolated d-pawn for white or creating dynamic counterplay for black. The move rc1 prepares to activate the rook on the semi-open c-file, putting pressure on black's queenside pawns and potentially supporting a future advance like c5. This move initiates a fianchetto for the queen's bishop, aiming to control the long diagonal and prepare for pawn advances on the queenside, a common theme in queen's gambit declined structures. This move prepares to support a potential queenside expansion with the b4 pawn push and centralizes the queen, opening diagonals for the bishops. This move develops the bishop to a useful diagonal, supporting the central pawn break with c5 and preparing to castle queenside or simply maintain solid defense. 12. Rfd1 aims to activate the rook on the d-file, preparing to contest it and support potential central pawn advances or piece activity. This move initiates a common plan in this queen's gambit declined structure, aiming to challenge white's central control and create dynamic play by exchanging pieces and potentially opening lines for black's pieces. This move initiates a strategic exchange, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially gain a central outpost after recapture. This move develops the bishop to a more active square, eyeing the d4 pawn and preparing to contest the c-file. Typical of the Catalan opening's strategic maneuvering. This move repositions the knight to a more active central square, preparing to contest the d5 square and potentially support a kingside attack or control key central squares. This move initiates a pawn break to challenge white's central control and open lines for black's pieces, aiming to exploit the bishop on d3, which can become a target. This exchange removes white's active bishop, simplifying the position and preparing to challenge black's central control after capturing the pawn. This move recaptures the bishop, maintaining material equality and allowing the queen to actively participate in the center, potentially supporting pawn advances or attacking key squares. This knight repositioning aims to redeploy the knight to a more active square, potentially to e4 or f3, and supports white's central pawn control. This pawn advance aggressively challenges white's central control and opens the e-file for black's rook, aiming to complicate the position and create dynamic play. This pawn exchange opens the d-file, creating dynamic possibilities for white's rook and potentially freeing black's queenside pieces. This move recaptures the pawn with a knight, centralizing the piece and preparing to contest the d-file and attack white's queenside. This move resolves the tension in the center and leads to a more open position where piece activity and pawn structure will become critical. This move recaptures the pawn and maintains central tension, while also repositioning the queen to a more active central square where it supports potential pawn advances and eyes the kingside. This move repositions the knight to a more active square, aiming to recapture central influence and potentially create attacking opportunities by supporting the pawn on e5 or developing pressure on the kingside. The queen repositions to a more active square, supporting the central pawn advance and preparing to redeploy to the kingside if white commits to castling. This move powerfully repositions the knight to the center, targeting the d5 pawn and preparing to challenge black's control over the e5 square and open files. This move is a crucial decision that resolves the central tension, leading to a simplification that favors black by opening the c-file for their rook and eliminating white's strong knight on d4. This move aims to simplify the position and gain a pawn advantage after the opponent's recent recapture with the pawn on d4, opening up the c-file for potential endgame pressure. This move challenges white's dominant knight on c6 and aims to exploit the open c-file, creating active counterplay for black's forces. This move, bc4+, is a strong tactical strike that exploits the black knight's current position, aiming to disrupt black's coordination and potentially win material. This move clears the king from the dangerous diagonal and prepares to defend the crucial h7 pawn, while also potentially allowing for king activity later if the center opens up. This rook maneuver on the 7th rank aims to exploit black's pinned knight on b4 and potentially create tactical opportunities against the kingside. This move seeks to disrupt white's coordinated pieces by creating a protected passed pawn, forcing a concession or further tactical complications in the center. This move aims to exploit the overloaded position of black's d-pawn by winning it with the rook, while simultaneously improving white's rook activity on the open d-file. This move initiates an immediate counterattack by targeting white's poorly defended queen and rook, aiming to recover the sacrificed material and simplify the position. This move prepares to challenge black's advanced knight on b4 and potentially open the d-file for the rook. This pawn thrust is a crucial defensive maneuver, aiming to disrupt white's active pieces and create counterplay on the queenside by opening a diagonal for black's light-squared bishop. This move sacrifices the bishop to disrupt black's pawn structure and gain a powerful central passed pawn, forcing black to either defend passively or break apart their pawn formation. This move initiates a daring pawn grab on the queenside, aiming to exploit white's temporary piece displacement and potentially disrupt their pawn structure. But it risks weakening black's kingside defenses. This move repositions the bishop to a more active square, preparing to defend the a2 pawn and potentially contest the a-file. This move brings the knight back into the fray, aiming to contest the open b-file and prepare for potential counterplay against white's queenside pawns. This move, qh5, initiates a powerful kingside attack by threatening mate on g7, forcing black to respond defensively and limiting their counterplay on the queenside. This move aims to improve the king's safety by creating a defensive pawn shield, while also preparing to challenge white's powerful queen on the h5 square and potentially open lines for counterplay on the kingside. This move initiates a powerful mating attack by sacrificing the rook on g6 to open lines against the black king, aiming to exploit the weakened light squares and the exposed position of the black monarch. This move repositions the rook to the open file, creating an immediate threat on the weakened kingside and preparing to contest control of the 7th rank. This move, rg7, offers an immediate pawn sacrifice to activate the rook on the g-file, aiming to overwhelm black's king with a mating attack and disrupt the coordination of black's pieces.